In 1982, just as the digital compact disc arrived in America promising perfect, noise-free sound, a Japanese audio company released a mechanical cassette deck into American stereo stores for an astonishing $1,150. It was called the Nakamichi Dragon. At a time when a standard tape player cost $100, this massive machine cost as much as a used car. Yet instead of dying quietly before the digital revolution, it seized the absolute top of the American hi-fi stereo rack for the next 11 years. Audiophiles willingly paid the premium. Independent stereo dealers built entire demonstration rooms around it. High-end American speakers, from JBL to Klipsch, suddenly relied on its flawless analog signal. The paradox was absolute. A machine built on the inherently flawed technology of magnetic tape became the ultimate audio status symbol at the exact dawn of the digital age. But the real story of the Nakamichi Dragon is not just the defiance of a format. It is the story of the American stereo rack, the pursuit of mechanical perfection, and what happens when the listening room decides that convenience matters more than fidelity. Every week, we tell the stories of the American speakers, stereo stores, and listening rooms that once shaped how people heard music, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific absence. Inside American high-fidelity showrooms, in the years just before 1982. In the 1970s, the American living room was an acoustic battleground dominated by the vinyl record. If a listener in Chicago or Detroit invested in a serious pair of speakers, a massive set of JBL L100s, or wood-veneered Advent loudspeakers, they expected those cabinets to reveal every detail pressed into the wax. The stereo receiver, glowing silver in the corner of the room, acted as the command center. But when it came to recording music at home, the American audiophile faced a frustrating compromise. The compact cassette, invented by Philips in the 1960s, was originally designed for voice dictation. It used a narrow strip of magnetic tape moving at a sluggish speed of 1 7/8 inches per second. In physical terms, that meant that there was very little magnetic surface area to capture the complex frequencies of a symphony or a rock band. When played through a high-quality American speaker system, early cassettes sounded dreadful. The bass was muddy, the high notes were lost, and sitting directly behind the music was a constant, distracting wall of static known as tape hiss, the inherent background noise of cheap magnetic tape. To the serious American listener, the cassette was a disposable convenience. It was something you shoved into the dashboard of a Chevrolet, or played on a cheap battery-powered box at the beach. It was not a format worthy of a dedicated listening room. If an American wanted to record an album, make a mixtape, or capture a live broadcast from a high-fidelity FM station like WNEW in New York or KMET in Los Angeles, there was only one respectable option: reel-to-reel tape. Reel-to-reel decks sounded magnificent, moving thick tape at high speeds across massive magnetic heads. But they were large, expensive, and difficult to use. A good reel-to-reel machine could cost more than a month's rent, and threading the tape manually was a delicate, tedious chore. The American stereo market lacked a critical component, an analog recording format that was as convenient as a cassette, but sounded as flawless as a record. The attempt to bridge that gap began in Tokyo, but its true proving ground was the American stereo store. Nakamichi Research, a Japanese audio engineering firm founded by Itsuro Nakamichi, had spent years designing magnetic heads for other electronics brands. But in the early 1970s, the company decided to build its own machines with a singular, seemingly impossible goal: to force the narrow, slow-moving cassette tape to deliver true high-fidelity audio. In 1973, the company sent a shockwave through the American market when it introduced the Nakamichi 1000. It was the first three-head cassette deck, separating the recording, playback, and erasing functions into distinct magnetic heads to maximize performance. The machine was massive, wrapped in a heavy wood cabinet and priced at over $1,000 in the United States. To put that into perspective, a highly respected Pioneer or Marantz stereo receiver at the time could be purchased for $300. American hi-fi dealers were initially skeptical. The idea of charging $1,000 for a machine that played dictation tapes seemed absurd, but then they listened to it. In demonstration rooms from Boston to Seattle, stereo salesmen routed the Nakamichi 1000 through the best American speakers on the floor. The sound was a revelation. Nakamichi had engineered a transport system, the mechanical assembly of motors, belts, and capstans that moves the tape, with such precision that it virtually eliminated the unstable speed fluctuations that caused the audio to wobble. The American audio press noticed immediately. Reviews in magazines like Stereo Review and Audio declared that the cassette had finally come of age. Nakamichi had proven that the format's poor reputation was not entirely the fault of the tape itself. It was the fault of the cheap machines playing it. By the late 90s, mid-1970s, Nakamichi had established a powerful foothold in the United States. You could not buy their products at a mass-market catalog store or a mall electronics shop. They were sold exclusively through a heavily vetted network of independent American hi-fi dealers. These were the dedicated stereo showrooms where salesmen wore ties, where speakers were wired to switchboards for direct comparison, and where customers spent hours sitting in a central listening chair analyzing the stereo image. In these rooms, Nakamichi became an aspirational brand. An American listener might start with a budget deck from Radio Shack, but the ultimate goal, the machine staring down from the top shelf of the display, was always a Nakamichi. Yet even as the brand dominated the high-end market, their engineers were obsessed with a persistent physical flaw in the cassette format. It was a problem that haunted anyone who traded mixtapes or recorded music on one machine and played it back on another. The issue was azimuth error. Azimuth refers to the precise angle at which the magnetic playback head meets the tape. For perfect sound, the microscopic gap on the playback head must be exactly parallel to the magnetic signals recorded on the tape. If the angle is off by even a fraction of a degree, the high frequencies disappear, and a cymbal crash suddenly sounds like it is wrapped in a heavy blanket. Because the plastic shells of cassettes were cheaply mass-produced, the tape inside rarely aligned perfectly. A tape recorded perfectly on a deck in Los Angeles might sound muffled and lifeless when played on a friend's deck in Chicago. For years, audiophiles solved this by using a small screwdriver to manually adjust the angle of the playback head while listening to a test tone. It was a tedious, delicate process that required patience and a steady hand. Nakamichi realized that to conquer the American stereo rack permanently, they could not rely on the listener to reach for a screwdriver. The machine itself had to learn how to listen to the tape and fix the physical geometry of the sound while the music was playing. In November 1982, Nakamichi answered the the azimuth problem with a machine that looked less like a home audio component and more like a piece of industrial laboratory equipment. It was named the Nakamichi Dragon, weighing over 21 pounds and encased in a heavily vented black aluminum chassis. It commanded immediate physical authority. When an American listener placed it at the top of their stereo rack, it dwarfed the silver-faced receivers and standard turntables sitting below it. The front panel was an intimidating architectural wall of controls, 52 separate buttons, switches, and calibration dials, all anchored by a massive cassette transport door and two brilliantly glowing analog output meters. But the true breakthrough was hidden entirely inside the transport. The mechanical system of motors, belts, capstans, and rollers that physically pulls the magnetic tape from the supply reel to the take-up reel. Nakamichi's engineers had developed a patented mechanical system called Nakamichi Auto Azimuth Correction, or NAAC. They had essentially built a microscopic, highly reactive robot inside the tape deck. When a user inserted a cassette and pressed the heavy play button, the Dragon did not just mindlessly spin the tape. Its playback head, the highly sensitive metal component that physically touches the tape to read the magnetic audio signal, was split into multiple independent tracks. As the tape swole kefidi moved rapidly across the head, the Dragon constantly measured the phase differences between the left and right audio channels. If it detected that the high frequencies were out of alignment due to a cheap plastic tape shell, a warped housing, or a bad recording from another machine, a dedicated internal motor physically tilted the playback head. It adjusted the angle by microscopic fractions of a millimeter, continuously, in real time, while the music was actively playing. To understand what this meant in an American listening room, imagine a college student returning to a dorm room with a bootleg cassette of a live rock concert, or a mixtape recorded by a friend on a cheap boombox. On a normal living room stereo system, that tape would sound dull, lifeless, and compressed. The cymbals would sound like they were wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. The snare drum would lack its sharp physical crack. But when that same flawed tape was pushed into the Nakamichi Dragon, the listener would hear a faint, highly engineered whirring sound from deep inside the machine. Suddenly, like a camera lens snapping into perfect physical focus, the heavy blanket would lift. The cymbals would instantly shimmer with metallic clarity. The vocal would lock perfectly into the center of the stereo image. The acoustic illusion that the singer is standing exactly midway between the left and right speakers. The Dragon was physically rewriting the geometry of the tape as it played, rescuing lost frequencies that the listener did not even know were there. This level of mechanical genius came with a staggering financial demand. In 1982, the Nakamichi Dragon carried a retail price of $1,150. To understand the gravity of that number in the American audio market, one must look at the economic reality of the era. The average weekly wage for an American worker at the time was just over $300. For $1,150, a consumer could buy a reliable used car. For less than half that price, a buyer could purchase a completely outfitted, highly respectable hi-fi system, including a Pioneer stereo receiver, a Technics turntable, a standard Sony cassette deck, and a large pair of JBL floor-standing speakers. The Dragon was not a product that could be sold in a Sears catalog or stacked in the aisles of a discount appliance store. It required a specific retail ecosystem to justify its massive cost. It thrived exclusively in the dedicated and acoustically treated listening rooms of elite independent American stereo dealers. High-end chains and respected boutique shops like Harvey Electronics in New York City, Paul Heath Audio in Chicago, Magnolia Hi-Fi in Seattle, and Listen Up in Denver became the proving grounds for the machine. In these quiet, carpeted showrooms, stereo salesmen would challenge prospective customers to bring in their worst-sounding cassettes. They would play the tape on a standard deck, allowing the customer to hear the muffled, compromised sound. Then they would move the tape to the Dragon, letting the NAAC system perform its mechanical magic in real time. The demonstration was undeniable. The machine closed the sale simply by revealing what other decks were missing. This was the ultimate Nakamichi moat. Other respected audio companies like Sony, Pioneer, and TEAC built excellent, high-quality cassette decks, but their machines could only guarantee perfect playback for tapes that had been recorded on those exact same machines. The Dragon did not care where a tape was recorded. It did not care if it was a pre-recorded commercial album bought at a local record store, a mixtape made in a suburban garage, or a live radio broadcast captured on a budget deck in another state. It corrected everything. It made every other cassette deck in America sound worse by comparison. The American audio press surrendered completely to the machine's engineering. Reviewers at Stereo Review, Audio Magazine, and High Fidelity tested the Dragon on laboratory benches and declared it the finest cassette deck ever manufactured. Julian Hirsch, the famously strict and objective audio critic, measured the Dragon's frequency response, how evenly a component reproduces low, middle, and high sounds across the human hearing spectrum, and found it virtually flat, rivaling the massive, cumbersome reel-to-reel machines that professional recording studios used. For the American audiophile who demanded absolute analog perfection in their living room, the machine was no longer just an option, it was a requirement. The heavy metallic badge on the front faceplate was not decoration. It was a promise about sound. By 1984, the Nakamichi Dragon was no longer just a piece of audio equipment. It was the absolute apex of the American hi-fi ecosystem. Music, it commanded the top shelf at elite, independent stereo stores across the country. From the quiet, acoustically treated listening rooms of Tweeter in New England to Bryn Mawr Stereo in Philadelphia, and from Stereo Exchange in New York City to Shelley's Stereo in Santa Monica, the machine was the ultimate retail closer. Nakamichi protected this American dealer network with ruthless discipline. The Dragon was never sold in department stores. It was never discounted in Sunday newspaper advertisements. If a stereo dealer attempted to slash the price to move inventory, Nakamichi immediately pulled their account. The machine retained its $1,150 price tag, and in doing so, it retained its absolute prestige. The Dragon rarely sat alone. It was the premier source component in the American stereo rack, sitting proudly above heavy silver-faced receivers and amplifiers from Macintosh, Harman Kardon, or Marantz. It was the machine trusted to feed pristine, corrected analog signal into the massive American speakers of the era. The Nakamichi read of the tape, the amplifier provided the power, and the sound was pushed into the acoustic suspension cabinets of acoustic research in the Northeast, or driven through the high-efficiency horns of Klipsch out of Hope, Arkansas. In a quiet, carpeted American living room, where the inherent background hiss and mechanical wobble of a standard cassette had always compressed and compromised the music, the Wright machine did something unprecedented. It made the narrow ribbon of magnetic tape sound indistinguishable from a flawless vinyl record, expanding the stereo image until the walls of the room seemed to vanish. Using the Dragon was a physical, highly mechanical ritual. The American listener did not just casually push a plastic button. They selected a premium blank cassette, often a heavy ceramic-housed metal tape, which was a specialized tape formulation designed to hold massive magnetic signal levels without distortion. They placed it into the transport. The motorized door clamped shut with the deliberate heavy precision of a bank vault. The dual capstan drive, a mechanism using two sets of spinning metal shafts and rubber pinch rollers to pull the tape with zero vibration, engaged instantly. The internal motors whirred as the Nakamichi auto azimuth correction system hunted for the perfect playback angle. And then, the brilliant red LED peak meters began their frantic, glowing dance across the black aluminum faceplate. Every gear, every motor, every microscopic adjustment, it was all designed to extract perfection from a fundamentally flawed format. This level of engineering birthed a new echelon of American listening culture, the archival audiophile recording. A listener in Chicago or Detroit would buy an expensive, imported vinyl record, bring it home and play it exactly once. During that single playback, the Dragon would capture the flawless audio. The listener would then file the record away in a sleeve forever, relying entirely on the Nakamichi's tape recording for daily listening. The cassette deck had successfully replaced the turntable as the daily driver of high-end American audio. The machine also became a legend in the underground American music scene. For fans of bands like the Grateful Dead, who actively encouraged the recording and trading of live concert tapes, the Dragon was the ultimate playback tool. A bootleg cassette that had been copied, traded, and mailed across the country often suffered from severe azimuth degradation. When played on a cheap deck, it sounded like it was recorded underwater. But when that same exhausted, degraded tape was fed into the Dragon, the mechanical playback head physically adjusted to the tape's warped geometry, wringing every last drop of high-frequency detail from the magnetic strip. At its peak, Nakamichi was selling thousands of these $1,050 machines to American consumers every year, defying every conventional rule of retail economics. Dealerships fought fiercely for the right to carry the brand, knowing that the mere presence of a Dragon on the showroom floor validated the quality of every other piece of equipment in the store. It was a golden era of mechanical engineering, a time when Americans believed that any problem with sound could be solved by building a heavier, smarter, more complex machine. The Dragon had achieved analog perfection. It had conquered the living room. But in doing so, it had climbed to a peak where there was nowhere left to go, and the ground beneath the American stereo store was already beginning to shift. Yet, for all its technical mastery, the Nakamichi Dragon remained entirely dependent on the physical ecosystem of the American stereo shop. Music. It lived or died by the strength of the dealer networks in cities like Minneapolis, Atlanta, and Dallas. When a buyer walked into a high-end stereo showroom in 1985, they did not purchase a Dragon out of casual curiosity. They entered seeking a destination experience. They sat in specialized auditioning chairs, flanked by acoustic panels and thick carpets, while a knowledgeable salesman dropped a high-grade metal cassette into the vault-like transport. They listened to the seamless transition between audio sources, felt the heavy, tactile resistance of the control knobs, and watched the rhythmic pulse of the peak meters illuminate the dim room. The machine was a masterclass in showroom psychology. It looked expensive, it felt monumental, and it performed with an exactness that made every competing deck look primitive. It was the ultimate statement piece of the analog decade. It anchored the listening rooms of recording studio engineers who wanted to check their final mixes on a reference-grade cassette before pressing master vinyl. It sat proudly in the custom walnut cabinetry of suburban homes across Ohio and California, wired directly into massive power amplifiers that could shake floorboards. It was the physical embodiment of an era when manufacturing was measured by weight, metal tolerances, and mechanical stubbornness. When the Nakamichi Dragon operated at its absolute peak, it achieved something profound. It made listeners forget they were listening to a tape at all. It took a consumer format originally built for dictation machines and elevated it into an instrument of breathtaking fidelity. The mechanical complexity that made it a legend, however, was also an admission of defeat. It required micromotors, optical sensors, and all-in-neat automated circuitry to fight against the physical limitations of magnetic tape. It was an engineering marvel built to defend an old world. And across the ocean, in laboratories far removed from the walnut-paneled showrooms of American hi-fi dealers, a new world was already being pressed onto shiny 5-inch discs of aluminum and polycarbonate. The machine had won the battle for the cassette, but the war for the American living room was about to change entirely. The first small crack in the Nakamichi Dragon's absolute dominance did not come from a better cassette deck. It came from a profound silence. Music? In late 1983 and early 1984, the same elite American stereo stores that proudly displayed the Dragon began to clear shelf space for a fundamentally different kind of machine, the compact disc player. Initially, the threat seemed remote. Early CD players were expensive, and the catalog of available music was tiny. The American audiophile, deeply invested in thousands of dollars of vinyl records and premium metal cassettes. often dismissed the early digital format as harsh, sterile, and unnatural. The Dragon, glowing and mechanically flawless, continued to anchor the high-end stereo rack. But the technological, retail, and listening culture shift, what we can call Force 5 of the American audio market, was relentless. To understand the slow collapse of the ultimate mechanical cassette deck, you have to look at the physical reality of the American listening room in the mid-1980s. Maintaining a Nakamichi Dragon was not a passive experience. It required active dedication. The intricate tape transport, with its dual capstans, pinch rollers, and multi-track playback heads, demanded regular cleaning with specialized fluids and cotton swabs. The magnetic heads needed periodic demagnetizing. Premium metal blank cassettes, required to achieve the deck's maximum frequency response, cost nearly $10 each. To extract perfect sound from the Dragon, the listener had to work for it. Then, an American customer walked into an independent hi-fi shop in Denver or Philadelphia. The salesman pressed a single button on a new digital machine. A motorized tray slid out, the customer dropped in a silver disc, the tray closed, and the music started instantly. There was no whirring of internal motors hunting for the correct azimuth angle. There was no need to meticulously check the peak meters to ensure the recording levels were not distorting. There was no flipping the tape over after 45 minutes. And most dangerously, when the music stopped, there was absolute dead digital silence. There was no tape hiss. There was no background rumble. It provided a pitch-black sonic background that the cassette format, no matter how heavily engineered, could never physically achieve. The paradox of the Dragon was suddenly exposed. It was a $1,150 masterpiece designed entirely to fix the inherent physical flaws of magnetic tape. But if the physical flaws of the tape were completely removed by switching to a digital disc, what was the purpose of the $1,150 machine? The decline was not immediate. The Dragon survived the initial digital wave because it held one massive advantage. In the 1980s, you could not record on a compact disc. For the American college student trading live concert bootlegs, the studio engineer making reference copies, and the audiophile meticulously archiving expensive vinyl records, the cassette remained the only viable home recording format. Through the late 1980s, the Nakamichi badge still meant absolute trust. The machine kept selling. The factory in Japan kept running. But the market around it was hollowing out. The threat to the Dragon was not just digital technology, it was the collapse of the American retail ecosystem that made selling a $1,150 cassette deck possible. This was Force 2, the rise of big box retail and immense price pressure. For decades, the American stereo market had been driven by independent hi-fi dealers. These local shops, with their acoustically treated listening rooms and highly trained salesmen, were the only places equipped to demonstrate exactly why a Nakamichi Dragon sounded better than a $200 deck from Sears. They survived on the kind that and the high profit margins that that premium equipment provided. By the end of the 1980s, the American retail landscape was shifting violently. Massive big box electronics chains like Circuit City, Best Buy, and Silo were expanding rapidly across the suburbs, destroying the old model of stereo sales. These warehouse stores did not have quiet, carpeted listening rooms. They had towering metal shelves stacked with cardboard boxes. They did not employ audio experts who could explain the physics of auto-azimuth correction. They employed teenage cashiers, is focused on moving high volume at low prices. In a big box store, nuance dies. The subtle mechanical superiority of the Dragon meant nothing in a fluorescent-lit aisle where a dozen different CD players and cheap dual-well cassette decks were all wired to a central switchboard, blaring simultaneously. Nakamichi fiercely refused to sell their flagship deck through these discount chains, correctly understanding that the mass-market environment would destroy the brand's prestige. But that pride, The bike came at a heavy cost, as the big box stores drove prices down and conditioned the American buyer to expect extreme discounts. The independent American hi-fi dealer began to suffocate. From Chicago to Los Angeles, the trusted local stereo shops, the very lifeblood of Nakamichi's American distribution network, started closing their doors. They simply could not compete with warehouse pricing. As the 1990s approached, the physical hierarchy of the American stereo rack changed. The receiver remained at the center, but the premium spot at the top, once the undisputed throne of the Dragon, was increasingly occupied by the CD player. The cassette deck was physically moved down, relegated to a secondary shelf, used not for critical listening, but merely to play back legacy tapes that had not yet been repurchased on digital discs. The listener who once proudly spent Saturday afternoons carefully monitoring recording levels and adjusting bias knobs was moving on. The new generation of American buyers did not want a machine that required active participation. They wanted a machine that disappeared into the background. Every time a local dealer went out of business, the Dragon lost another stage where it could perform. The machine itself remained a marvel of uncompromising engineering, but the American retail and cultural ecosystem that sustained it was beginning to quietly collapse. By 1990, the underground tape trading communities that had relied on the machine began to abandon it. The audiophiles trading Grateful Dead bootlegs across the country discovered the digital DAT tape and soon after the recordable CD-R. The analog cassette, with its inherent hiss and mechanical limitations, was instantly obsolete for critical archival work. The Dragon's auto-azimuth system could correct a warped tape, but it could not turn a tape into a flawless digital file. The recording studios in Los Angeles and New York that had used the Dragon to check reference mixes boxed the machines up and placed them in storage closets. Nakamichi attempted to survive the technological shift by doing what they did best: over-engineering. They introduced the Music Bank system, a highly complex mechanical CD changer that loaded multiple digital discs internally without a heavy carousel. It was brilliant. It was expensive. And the American retail market utterly rejected it. Buyers did not want to pay a massive premium for a mechanical disc changer. When a cheap Sony or Magnavox player at Circuit City did the exact same job, the crisis accelerated. Force 4, corporate consolidation and brand dilution arrived to finish the dismantling. Stripped of its retail network and losing money rapidly as the high-end stereo market shrank, the original Japanese company was sold. By the late 1990s, the Nakamichi brand was acquired by Grande Holdings, a corporate conglomerate that specialized in buying famous, distressed audio names and licensing their badges. The Nakamichi name, which once commanded the absolute top shelf of the American hi-fi rack, was pasted onto mass-market electronics. An American consumer walking through a discount store in the early 2000s could find the Nakamichi logo printed on a cheap PC speaker system, a set of budget Bluetooth headphones, or a plastic soundbar designed to sit under a flat-screen television. The original engineers were gone. The dedicated factories were closed. The listening culture that justified a $1,150 cassette deck had vanished. The badge survived, but the promise it represented was completely hollow. For the Nakamichi Dragon itself, the end arrived long before the brand was diluted. The company quietly ceased production of its flagship deck in 1993. There was no grand announcement. There was no final commemorative edition. The American Audio magazine simply stopped printing cassette deck reviews. Inside American homes, the remaining machines began to face the relentless reality of physics: a high-end cassette deck. Toridak is essentially a clockwork engine. It requires perfect tension. Over time, the internal lubricants dried into crust. The rubber pinch rollers, designed to pull the tape with zero vibration, hardened and cracked. The intricate rubber drive belts melted into a sticky black tar. The microscopic motors driving the azimuth correction system seized. When the machines broke, American listeners faced a harsh choice. They could ship the heavy deck to a specialized repair technician, wait months for scarce parts, and pay $500 to have it meticulously rebuilt. Or they could simply walk into a big box store, buy a new CD player for $100 and never worry about mechanical maintenance again. Most chose the digital convenience. The physical stereo rack was slowly dismantled. The massive stereo receivers were unplugged. The heavy wooden cabinets of American hi-fi speakers were carried into basements and garages. The era of active mechanical listening was over. The showroom went dark. The big box retail won. The factory line stopped. The brand was sold. The metal badge moved to plastic. The analog tape stopped turning. The belts turned to dust. The motors finally ceased. The stereo rack disappeared. The soundbar took its place. In the American consumer electronics market today, the Nakamichi name still technically exists. If a shopper logs onto Amazon or walks into an American big box electronics retailer, they can purchase a Nakamichi soundbar system designed to sit on a plastic shelf beneath a flat-screen television. It is a wireless convenience product built for a market that demands instant connectivity. The original Japanese engineering firm that designed the auto-azimuth system, the company that milled the heavy aluminum faceplates and built the complex tape transports, is completely gone, absorbed, and dissolved by corporate holding companies decades ago. The badge survived the digital transition. The mechanical soul of the company did not. But while the corporate entity vanished, the Nakamichi Dragon itself refused to die in America. Today, it sits at the absolute center of a massive, heavily funded American vintage audio preservation community on secondary market platforms like eBay and AudioGone, and within specialized enthusiast forums, the Dragon is hunted with ruthless dedication. A broken, non-functioning unit pulled from a dusty garage in Ohio or a basement in Texas can sell for $2,000. A fully restored, perfectly calibrated Dragon routinely commands prices shucksy exceeding $5,000, making it far more expensive today than it was in 1982. This secondary market is sustained by a quiet, highly specialized network of American repair technicians. In independent workshops scattered across the United States, from small benches in New England to specialized audio labs in California, technicians spend dozens of hours meticulously rebuilding these clockwork engines. They strip away the dried lubricants. They replace the internal rubber drive belts that have melted into sticky tar. They source new pinch rollers, re-lubricate seized micromotors, and use oscilloscopes to recalibrate the mechanical playback heads. The people paying for this extreme labor are not just wealthy collectors hoarding trophies. They are American recording engineers, audio archivists, and dedicated analog listeners who refuse to let their massive tape libraries degrade into silence. The Dragon passes the ultimate test of vintage audio. American buyers do not pay $5,000 merely for the nostalgia of glowing red meters. They pay for the machine because it performs a physical task that no modern technology can replicate. In the 21st century, a digital algorithm can easily simulate tape saturation or artificial analog warmth, but a computer cannot physically reach into a warped 30-year-old plastic cassette shell and perfectly align a magnetic head to a degraded ribbon of tape. The Nakamichi Dragon remains the most accurate instrument ever built for extracting audio data from the compact cassette format. It is not a museum piece, it is a necessary mechanical tool. The physical landscape that originally supported the Dragon in America, however, has been completely erased. The elite, independent stereo showrooms that once used the machine to anchor their high-end listening rooms, places like Harvey Electronics on 45th Street in Manhattan, or the sprawling hi-fi dealer networks of the Pacific Northwest, are entirely gone. The acoustically treated rooms where salesmen in ties once demonstrated the superiority of mechanical correction have been demolished, replaced by bank branches, fast casual restaurants, and smartphone retail stores. The American retail market no longer has a physical space dedicated to sitting in a single chair and watching a machine work. There is a profound, almost cruel irony to the Dragon's afterlife in the modern American market. Over the past decade, the cassette format has experienced a massive cultural resurgence. Major American pop stars and independent bands routinely release new albums on tape. Millions of cassettes are sold in the United States every year to a new generation of listeners. But the factories that produced the heavy, dual-capstan transports and precision magnetic heads were dismantled in the 1990s. As a result, almost every modern cassette player manufactured today relies on a cheap, generic, highly flawed plastic mechanism. Millions of young American listeners are buying cassettes, but because the Dragon and its peers are out of reach, they have never actually heard how flawless a cassette was engineered to sound. The story of the Nakamichi Dragon is a reflection of how the American audio market processes progress. It highlights the exact moment when the culture of the American listening room traded mechanical permanence for digital convenience. For a brief, shining window in the 1980s, consumers believed that absolute fidelity was worth the high cost, worth the heavy weight, and worth the active physical maintenance. The Dragon proved that human engineering could overcome the physical limits of a flawed format, but the retail market ultimately rewarded the path of least resistance. We threw away complex machines that could be repaired and replaced them with sealed digital boxes that are thrown away when the technology shifts again. We gained absolute digital silence, infinite retail convenience, and a world of music in our pockets. But we lost the physical ritual of the stereo rack. Yet somewhere in an American basement, sitting heavy on a reinforced shelf above a silver receiver, Nakamichi Dragon still powers on, its analog meters glowing red in the dark, its internal motors whirring as the playback head perfectly aligns to the tape, pulling music from magnetic rust and pushing it out through a pair of walnut cabinets into the room. See you in the next video.